So I've always been the one to jump in and help someone in need. If I see someone struggling with something, I've always been the type to just come in and see if they need any help. And the reason I say that is because I was driving down the freeway the other day and I saw this man on the side of the road. And from that side of the road, it seemed that there was a dip, a very steep dip from the road he was on. And then the next road, it was like a little, like a significant height. So it looked like almost as if he was contemplating on jumping or hurting himself. So I decided to pull over to the side. On the other, I had to go to like another street, and I walked across, and I asked him, I said, "Are you okay?" And then he said, "Oh yeah, don't worry about it, man. I'm just eating my cereal." Obviously, that was nowhere near what I thought was going on. He was just enjoying his meal. But the reason I pulled over and did that is because especially nowadays, I feel like the rise of what I thought he was doing, the action of suicide, has been a lot more common. So why do we commit suicide? Especially nowadays, I would have, you would have thought we would have evolved out of that. Looking back to how we evolved to where we're at now, survival of the fittest, you want to call it, natural selection. You would think that us humans today would be able to withstand and have those virtues that are going to help us be able to thrive and reproduce. And, the ones who would have committed suicide, those people would have been long gone. But that brings the question. So what could possibly be the cause for us still committing this act? And what it really all boils down to is sin. So with the increase of suicides lately, we've also had roughly in the past decade a deduction in the amount of people who claim Christianity or claim to know God, to claim to believe in God. And it's gone from 77% to 65%, which is pretty drastic. And with that, it's obviously come a lot more sin, a lot more people not knowing who God is. And we can see that there's a direct correlation between suicide and, the deduction in believers in this world. What I also find interesting is that animals, when it comes to animals, we know that I was looking at a couple cases with animals and studies on them and showing if they've ever committed suicide. And I came to find that there's been incidents where they found animals who have committed suicide, not even committed suicide, we'll say have ended their lives, but it hasn't been for the same reasons, if that makes sense. For example, a mother spider who decides to give herself up to her offspring in order for them to eat her. She's doing it out of the will to care for her offspring. I saw another case with this deer who was running away from dogs who were hunting it and jumped off a cliff. And we can say that deer did not jump off a cliff because he was depressed, hopeless. We know that he did it because, it was his instinct, his animalistic instinct running away from those dogs. He had no intention to kill himself because he was sad or anything. Well, the reason that these animals would never commit suicide out of, hopelessness or depression is because they don't have access to sin, really, because they're not granted the free will that God has given, like to us. We humans have been given a gift from God to have the option to worship him and know him and to be aware of who he is and receive salvation from him, while to our knowledge, so far as we know, animals have not received that. And for that reason, they haven't committed these acts out of sin, but rather just animalistic instincts, whereas humans have. So as humans, we must be aware that yes, we've been granted a wonderful gift from God to high intellect, to know who he is and be aware of who he is. But also in the same token, we've also need to be aware that with that comes the potential to sin and fall short. So taking from that, we got to understand that, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it states that too. We're only stewards. We're not owners of this life we're given. We're stewards. It's something God has given to us, and this life that we have, it's owned by God. We do not have a right or possess a right to end this life on our own timing, our own will. That's up to God. And that's why it's, very important that we consider that, God's not going to provide us with a life we cannot handle. So although there is potential to sin in this world, lots of potential, there's also an abundance of grace and gifts that God has given us to acquire, to use as strength. So I'm reading a book, Learning the Virtues That Lead You Closer to God. I believe that's the title of the book, if I'm not mistaken, by Romano Guadagnini. Awesome, smart priest. One of the virtues I was reading on acceptance, and he goes on to the book to say that, that some cannot bear to accept the burden of this life we carry and just decide to throw it away. And it goes on to explain how important it is that we must not fall to do that. That how it's important that we accept these free will that God given us, accept the things that we can. It goes back to the I forget the prayer, the name of the prayer, to accept the things we cannot change, as far as accepting the gifts God has given us and accepting that there is potential to sin, and accepting that we must not take our own lives on our own desire and have to leave that to God. So while we accept all these things, it's important that we always remember that yes, there's this potential sin, there's these evil things, evil acts, but that suicide isn't the only option, or isn't ever the option, if any. That we know that we always do have a choice. It isn't just that suicidal act that's the only thing left to do, that it isn't the only way out, that you do matter, and that God does have a plan for you, that God's planned it all out already, that your life is owed to God. Remember that there's something far greater that's always going to overcome that sin and evil act, and that's God himself.